For decades, every car maker agreed you cannot fit 4 adults into a car 10 feet long. Rear-wheel drive demanded it. The engine, gearbox, and driveshaft to the back axle devoured space. But in 1959, a Greek engineer by the name of Alec Issigonis, who hated mathematics, destroyed that logic. He turned the engine sideways, buried the gearbox in the sump, and drove the front wheels instead. The result was a car so small it looked like a toy, yet so spacious it humiliated vehicles twice its size. The establishment called it a death trap. The public called it the Mini, Britain's best-selling car in history. To understand why one engineer's obsession with space could destroy an entire engineering doctrine, you have to see the crisis Britain faced in 1956. In September, Colonel Nasser nationalised the Suez Canal. Britain and France tried to stop him, but the Egyptians responded by blowing up the Syrian pipeline. 20% of Britain's oil supply vanished overnight. Petrol rationing returned to British streets for the first time since the war. Suddenly, the big, thirsty cars that had dominated the roads looked like dinosaurs. Bubble cars, the BMW Isetta, the Messerschmitt KR 200, tiny, fragile, two-stroke contraptions from Germany, flooded into Britain. They were awful to drive, questionable in safety, but they achieved over 40 miles per gallon. Leonard Lord, chairman of the British Motor Corporation, watched this invasion with disgust. He summoned Alec Issigonis, an engineer who had recently returned to BMC after a failed stint designing a supercar for Alvis. Lord's instruction was blunt. God damn these bloody awful bubble cars. We must drive them off the streets by designing a proper small car. But there was a problem. Every small car on the market was a compromise. Rear-wheel drive was the universal layout. The engine sat at the front, pointing lengthways. Behind it, a gearbox. Then a long propeller shaft running underneath the cabin to the rear axle. This driveline consumed nearly half the car's length, forcing designers to choose, either make the car longer or make the passengers suffer. The Fiat 600, designed by Dante Giacosa, solved this by placing the engine at the back, beyond the rear axle. It worked. 4 adults could sit in a car barely larger than a bubble car. But rear-engined cars were tricky to handle, prone to oversteer, dangerous in the hands of inexperienced drivers. Issigonis had a different obsession. He believed that people who drive small cars are the same size as those who drive large cars, and they should not be expected to put up with claustrophobic interiors. He wanted maximum space for people, minimum space for machinery. But how do you achieve that when the entire motor industry is built around rear-wheel drive? Issigonis had already proved it could be done. Before leaving BMC in 1952, he had been working on a front-wheel drive Morris Minor replacement with a transverse engine, turned sideways, and an end-on gearbox. The entire powertrain occupied only 2 feet. But when he returned in 1955, that project had been shelved. Now, in March 1957, Leonard Lord gave him a new brief. 10 feet long, no more, no less. 4 adults, and it had to use an engine already in production. No time or money for a new one. Issigonis assembled a tiny team. Jack Daniels, Chris Kingham, 4 draftsmen, 2 students. That was it. No budget, no time, just an impossible problem. The problem was this. Mount an engine transversely with the gearbox end on, and the powertrain is too wide. The car would lose steering lock. Issigonis sketched, calculated, cursed. He even considered a 2-cylinder engine. Hopeless. Then he had the idea. What if the gearbox sat underneath the engine, mounted directly in the sump, sharing the same oil? It was a compromise. Engine oil isn't ideal for gearboxes, and it would whine. But it worked. The entire unit now fit within the car's width. But front-wheel drive meant the wheels had to steer and drive simultaneously. Existing suspension couldn't cope. Issigonis turned to Alex Moulton, who designed compact rubber cone springs instead of coil springs. Smaller, variable rate, perfect for front-wheel drive. Then there were the wheels. Standard wheels were 16 or 17 inches. Issigonis wanted 10 inches. Smaller wheels meant smaller wheel arches, more passenger space. Dunlop said impossible. Issigonis insisted. Dunlop developed a special tyre, 5.20 by 10 inches. Tiny. Unprecedented. By July 1957, the first prototype was running. Issigonis had the car cut lengthways and moved apart by 4 inches. It looked right. 80% of the car's footprint was now usable space. No car in history had achieved that. But BMC's board was sceptical. Lord Nuffield called it a poached egg. The engineering department worried about cost. Marketing worried about the stark interior. No radio, no heater as standard, sliding windows to save door space. The biggest worry was profitability. To meet the planned August 1959 launch, Issigonis' all-independent suspension was replaced with a cheaper leaf-sprung rear axle. But the core remained. Transverse engine, gearbox in sump, front-wheel drive, 10-inch wheels. The question now was whether the world would accept a car that looked like nothing else on the road. Before Issigonis could answer that, he had to solve a problem no one had anticipated. The first prototypes, disguised with Austin A35 grills and nicknamed the Orange Boxes, were tested at night on a circuitous route through the Cotswolds. During the day, they circulated around a disused airfield at Chalgrove, hammering around the badly maintained perimeter taxiway. Within 500 hours, the cars had covered 30,000 miles. The body shell around the suspension mounting points was breaking. The stresses were too much. Therefore, Issigonis redesigned the suspension. Instead of mounting the rubber cones directly to the body shell, he created separate subframes, front and rear, to absorb the forces. It added weight, it added cost, but it worked. But then another problem emerged. Early prototypes were clocked at over 92 miles per hour. BMC's management panicked. This was supposed to be an economy car for housewives and pensioners, not a racing machine. Therefore, Issigonis was ordered to reduce the engine size. The 948 cubic centimeters A-series engine was de-stroked to 848 cubic centimeters, cutting the top speed to a more respectable 72 miles per hour. But that created a new issue. The smaller engine produced less power at low revs, putting more stress on the gearbox. The existing Austin A35 synchromesh began destroying itself after just 100 miles. The gears were too large, creating too much inertia. Therefore, Issigonis rotated the engine 180 degrees, placing the carburetor at the rear instead of the front. This allowed him to introduce transfer gears, which made the gears smaller and reduced the stress on the synchromesh. The official reason given was to prevent carburetor icing. John Cooper, the racing car designer, later called that explanation a load of bull. But even with the smaller gears, the A35 synchromesh wasn't strong enough. A new Porsche-style bulk ring synchromesh was in development, but it wouldn't be ready in time for the August 1959 launch. Therefore, BMC went ahead with the old system anyway, knowing it would need replacing later. Then there was the issue of the car's appearance. George Harriman, BMC's managing director, looked at the first pre-production model and was appalled. "What a bloody mess," he said. "We'll never sell that. Spend another few quid on it, Alec, and jazz it up a bit. Put some chrome plate on it or something." Therefore, BMC's styling department added a grille and chrome embellishments. The original plain metal front panel with stamped slots was later used on the commercial van variants. But the biggest challenge was manufacturing. The Mini wasn't just a new car, it was a completely new way of building cars. The production lines at Longbridge had to be retooled. Suppliers had to be convinced to produce components they'd never made before. And there was no time. Leonard Lord had given Issigonis a secret weapon, a priority number. When drawings carrying that number arrived at the machine shops, everything stopped. Parts could be made overnight from freehand sketches if they were dimensioned. It was a fast lane that bypassed every normal queue and veto point inside the factory. Therefore, by August 1959, the car was ready. The Austin 7 and Morris Mini Minor were launched at the Earl's Court Motor Show in London on August 26th. The starting price was £496 including tax, astonishingly low. Critics praised the space efficiency, the handling, the sheer cleverness of the design. But sales were slow at first. The British public didn't trust it. It was too small, too strange, too radical. But then something unexpected happened. Peter Sellers bought one. So did Twiggy. Princess Margaret was photographed stepping out of hers. The Mini became a status symbol, not despite its size, but because of it. By 1963, it was selling 134,000 units a year in Britain alone. In 1964, Paddy Hopkirk won the Monte Carlo Rally in a Mini Cooper, humiliating cars with 5 times the engine capacity. The tiny car with the whining gearbox had become a giant killer. Today, the layout Issigonis pioneered, transverse engine, front-wheel drive, wheels at the corners, is the template for almost every small car on the planet. But the world didn't copy his gearbox in sump design. That was too compromised. Instead, they copied Dante Giacosa's refinement, the gearbox beside the engine, not underneath it. Issigonis proved it could be done, Giacosa proved it could be done without the whine. But proving the layout worked was only the beginning. The real question was whether it would survive. In 1960, Ford bought a Mini. They didn't drive it, they tore it apart, down to the spot welds. They wanted to know how BMC could sell it so cheaply. Ford's cost accountants rebuilt it on paper, calculating every rivet, every panel, every weld. Their conclusion? BMC was losing £30 on every car. Ford's executives relaxed. Let them bleed, they thought. But Ford missed something. The Mini wasn't just a car, it was a hidden system. Inside Longbridge, Leonard Lord had created a priority fast lane that allowed Issigonis' team to bypass normal factory queues. Drawings carrying the special priority number could be turned into parts overnight. It was a form of institutional protection that allowed radical ideas to survive inside a conservative corporation. The problem was profitability. BMC had priced the Mini to undercut the Ford Popular, assuming volume would cover the costs. It didn't. The gearbox in sump design was expensive to manufacture. The 10-inch wheels required special tyres. The rubber cone suspension needed precision machining. Every clever space-saving feature added cost. In the late 1960s, the truth was undeniable. The Mini was selling millions, but making almost nothing. Some estimates suggested a profit of just £15 per car. Others claimed it was a loss. Meanwhile, Ford was making £50 profit on every Cortina. But the layout itself was vindicated. By the 1970s, almost every car manufacturer in the world had copied the transverse engine front-wheel drive principle. Not because they admired Issigonis, but because the physics were irrefutable. It was the most space-efficient way to package a small car. However, they didn't copy the gearbox in sump. That was Issigonis' compromise, born of desperation and a 10-foot length limit. Instead, they copied Dante Giacosa's Fiat 128 layout, the gearbox beside the engine, not underneath it. Separate lubrication, no whine. It became the global standard. Issigonis had destroyed rear-wheel drive. But he hadn't written the final blueprint. He had proved the concept, Giacosa refined it, and the world adopted the refinement. Today, if you drive a small car, any small car, you are sitting in a vehicle whose layout was born in a crisis, sketched on the back of envelopes, and built in a factory where one man had a priority number that could stop production overnight. The Mini sold 5.3 million units, but its real legacy isn't the sales figures. It's the fact that almost every car on the road today is a descendant of Issigonis' 10-foot box. Rear-wheel drive didn't die because it was bad engineering. It died because one Greek engineer who hated mathematics proved there was a better way to use space. And once the world saw it, there was no going back.